What if the most impactful minds in history aren't the ones you learned about in school? Prepare to have your understanding of progress challenged. This video unearths the forgotten visionaries whose radical ideas were dismissed yet secretly shaped the world we live in today. You won't believe how much we owe to names you've never heard.
Welcome, dear viewers, to our channel, where every story has a secret and every mystery has meaning. We take you beyond the headlines and deep into the truth that time has buried. Get ready to see the world like never before. Now, we explain, unmasking history's forgotten visionaries and their legacies.
History, as we know it, is a selective storyteller. It celebrates the conquerors, the kings, the emperors, and the inventors whose names have been carved into the marble of collective memory. Yet behind every well-known genius stands a shadow, a forgotten visionary, someone who dared to imagine beyond the limits of their time, but whose name never made it into the textbooks. Their brilliance was not dim, it was simply eclipsed by circumstance, politics, prejudice, or the cruel hands of time. Unmasking history's forgotten visionaries and their legacies is a journey through these unseen corridors of the past, a cinematic odyssey into the hearts and minds of those who dreamed, created, and changed humanity without ever being celebrated for it. The story begins in the ancient world, a place where innovation often blossomed in silence. In the dusty workshops of Alexandria, far from the grand halls of scholars, craftsmen and thinkers labored over ideas that would later be credited to others. Among them was Hypatia of Alexandria, a woman whose luminous intellect once guided the minds of men in an era that tried to silence her voice. She taught mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy in a world ruled by patriarchal authority. Her vision of a rational universe, governed by laws of geometry and celestial patterns, was revolutionary. Yet history remembered her not as a visionary scientist, but as a martyr. Her brilliance drowned beneath the politics of faith and gender. Hypatia's death was more than the loss of a scholar. It was the symbolic silencing of countless women who could have shaped science had the world listened. But Hypatia was not alone in her obscurity. Across continents and centuries, there were dreamers who dared to sculpt the invisible. In China's Han Dynasty, a man named Zhang Heng designed one of the world's first seismographs, a bronze vessel that could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away. His creation predated modern seismic technology by nearly 2 millennia, yet few beyond historians of Chinese science remember his name. His invention, dismissed by Western scholars for centuries, was rediscovered long after his death. The world that once ignored his genius now recognizes that Zhang Heng's vision anticipated scientific principles that would not reappear until the age of mechanization. His seismograph was more than a device. It was a metaphor for the hidden pulse of forgotten knowledge, tremors of brilliance buried beneath layers of time. The forgotten visionaries of history often shared one tragic fate. They lived too far ahead of their time. Consider Juba II of Mauritania, a North African king whose curiosity bridged the worlds of Africa, Rome, and Greece. Trained in the arts and sciences of the Mediterranean, Juba dreamed of a synthesis between cultures. He established libraries, funded expeditions, and commissioned works on geography and botany. Yet, to the Roman chroniclers, he was merely a client king, a pawn in the empire's political game. His contributions to early geography and cross-cultural knowledge faded into obscurity. The libraries he built vanished, their scrolls scattered or burned. But Zuba's vision of intellectual fusion anticipated the Renaissance long before Europe rediscovered it. He believed that wisdom belonged not to a nation, but to humanity. His life whispers a truth history often forgets, that the borders drawn by power cannot contain the boundless curiosity of the human spirit.
If Juba's legacy was drowned by politics, then that of Abul Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in the West as Al-Bukhasis, was obscured by translation. Living in 10th century Andalusia, he wrote a 30-volume encyclopedia of medicine and surgery. His illustrated surgical instruments and techniques would later form the backbone of modern surgery, yet his name was gradually erased from European credit. The West remembered his knowledge, but not his identity. His work traveled across continents, changing lives, saving lives, but the man who conceived it became a ghost behind the pages of history. The erasure was not accidental, it was cultural. When knowledge migrated from the Islamic world to Europe during the Middle Ages, it was often stripped of its original names. Albucasis' instruments, scalpels, forceps, and sutures became universal, but their creator remained invisible. This pattern of quiet theft, of brilliance without acknowledgement, echoes through centuries. In a dimly lit workshop in 15th century Italy, another forgotten figure worked in the shadow of greatness. While Leonardo da Vinci sketched the designs of flight and anatomy, his contemporary, Francesco di Giorgio Martini, designed war machines, hydraulic systems, and architectural marvels that inspired the Renaissance masters. His notebooks, filled with intricate drawings and theories, were a precursor to da Vinci's codices. Yet history only had room for one genius in that era's narrative. Francesco's contributions became mere footnotes, his manuscripts attributed to others or lost in the archives of forgotten libraries. His story reflects a deeper truth about human memory, that recognition is not always the companion of brilliance, and that history's spotlight rarely shines on all who deserve it. The journey of forgotten visionaries is also a tale of displacement, of ideas born in one land and stolen by another. Take the story of ancient India's mathematicians, whose discoveries laid the foundation for modern arithmetic and algebra. Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and Bhaskara too developed concepts of zero, negative numbers, and trigonometric functions long before Europe emerged from its dark ages. Yet for centuries, Western education systems attributed these mathematical revolutions to later European scholars. The cultural arrogance of empire erased names and nations, transforming the East's intellectual legacy into a footnote beneath Western discovery. Even today, the term Arabic numerals masks the deeper truth that they were born in India, refined in Baghdad, and only then carried to the world. The legacy of these mathematicians was not entirely lost, but diluted, scattered across the rivers of time like ancient symbols carved on stones that no longer stand. As we trace these shadows, we find one thread connecting them all: the unrelenting human will to create, even in obscurity. The forgotten visionaries did not seek fame, they sought understanding. They believed that truth, once discovered, belonged to all. Their obscurity is our loss, but their persistence is our inheritance. In every unacknowledged discovery lies a fragment of their spirit. The compass of invention points to their courage. The architecture of modern science rests on their shoulders. Yet history, intoxicated with power and prestige, often buried them under monuments of the famous. To unmask them is not merely to restore justice, it is to reclaim the roots of our shared genius.
The sands of time are filled with buried footprints. In the vast desert of forgotten memory lies the story of the Dogon people of Mali, who, long before the invention of telescopes, possessed astronomical knowledge of the Sirius star system. Anthropologists debated for decades how such knowledge could exist in an isolated region. Some dismissed it as myth, others saw it as evidence of deep ancestral observation. But regardless of how it was obtained, the Dogon's knowledge challenges the arrogance of assuming that scientific understanding belongs only to modernity. It reveals a truth that echoes through the ages, that wisdom can thrive in any soil, under any sky, if curiosity is allowed to bloom. Similarly, in the humid forests of Mesoamerica, the Maya charted the cosmos with precision unmatched for centuries. Their calendars, aligned with celestial cycles, reflected a mathematical understanding so advanced that even European scholars struggled to comprehend it centuries later. Yet their achievements were long dismissed as superstition by colonial historians who sought to paint indigenous cultures as primitive. Their observatories, built from limestone and aligned with the stars, stood as silent witnesses to a civilization that understood time not as a line, but as a living circle. The Maya's forgotten astronomers were visionaries in their own right. architects of eternity whose work still guides archaeologists and astronomers today. To unmask the forgotten is also to confront the systems that erased them. Colonialism, patriarchy, and power have always been the gatekeepers of recognition. Countless women, thinkers of color, and scientists outside the Western canon were silenced because their brilliance did not fit the accepted image of genius. Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer, died unrecognized for her visionary foresight into computing. Her work on Charles Babbage's analytical engine prefigured modern software, yet she was remembered as merely an assistant until long after her death. In her story lies a symbol for all who built the scaffolding of modern progress, but were denied their share of like. As night falls over the first part of our journey, one question lingers like a haunting melody. How many more remain unremembered? How many voices lie buried beneath ruins, their dreams fossilized in silence? Every discovery we celebrate today was once a whisper in the dark, a thought that risked oblivion. And yet, even in that darkness, brilliance endures. The forgotten visionaries of history remind us that human progress is not a straight line drawn by a few celebrated names, but a vast constellation of minds, some shining, others unseen, yet all contributing to the great light of knowledge that guides us still. Their legacies are not dead. They live in the pulse of technology, in the rhythm of discovery, in the courage to imagine differently. To unmask them is not merely to honor the past, but to expand the boundaries of our future. Because every forgotten visionary is a reminder that history's silence does not erase truth. It only delays its awakening. As the Renaissance dawned over Europe, sunlight pierced through the clouds of medieval ignorance, illuminating a world eager to rediscover the wisdom of antiquity. But behind the gilded names of Da Vinci, Galileo, and Copernicus lay an invisible army of thinkers, artisans, translators, and explorers who carried torches of knowledge across generations. The Renaissance, often hailed as the rebirth of human intellect, was not born from a single spark. It was the culmination of countless uncredited flames, each burning quietly in the margins of history. These forgotten men and women were the silent architects of progress, weaving together fragments of knowledge into the tapestry of modern civilization. The story begins in the dim corridors of monasteries and scriptoriums, where anonymous scribes bent over parchment under flickering candlelight. Their fingers, ink-stained and weary, copied the wisdom of lost civilizations. Without these nameless preservers of thought, the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy would have perished. They were not authors, but guardians, monks who risked their lives to protect manuscripts from fire, war, and decay. The Renaissance owes its resurrection of knowledge to these hidden custodians. History, however, rarely writes the names of those who saved it. The monks who carried fragile scrolls across crumbling empires were the unseen bridges between antiquity and modernity. Their devotion to knowledge transcended creed and crown. Amid this revival, the world witnessed an explosion of art and science, but not all of its visionaries were European men of fame. In 16th century Italy, Sofonisba Anguissola shattered the boundaries imposed upon women in art. Born into an age that believed creativity was a masculine domain, Sofonisba painted portraits so alive that even Michelangelo praised her skill. Yet, as centuries passed, her name faded beneath the weight of male-dominated narratives. Her works were often attributed to others, her genius dismissed as anomaly. But Sofonisba's influence reached far beyond her lifetime. She mentored younger artists, inspired court painters, and redefined what women could achieve in the Renaissance. Her story is a mirror reflecting countless women who painted, composed, and invented in silence, their brilliance erased by the arrogance of history. Beyond Europe's cobblestone streets, another intellectual awakening stirred, one that the Western world refused to recognize. In Timbuktu, within the ancient libraries of Mali, scholars compiled astronomical tables, medical treatises, and philosophical works that rivaled the finest European universities.
The manuscripts of Timbuktu, written in Arabic and African languages, contain theories of planetary motion, algebra, and law centuries ahead of their European counterparts. Yet when colonial explorers arrived, they saw only ruins, dismissing Africa as a continent without intellect. The scholars who once debated under the desert sun were forgotten, their manuscripts buried beneath sand and indifference. Only recently has the world begun to rediscover their brilliance, a testament to the enduring light of knowledge that refuses to die even when neglected.
The Renaissance also owed much to the translators who bridged civilizations. One such figure was Fatima Alfieri, a woman from Fez who founded the world's first university, the University of Akkad-Wayin, in 859 CE. Her institution educated generations of scholars who would later influence the European Renaissance. Yet her name is almost never mentioned alongside the founders of Oxford or Bologna. Fatima's vision created a space where science, philosophy, and theology intertwined, nurturing minds that would carry Islamic, Greek, and African knowledge into Europe. She never sought fame. Her legacy was the pursuit of enlightenment itself. In the light of her university, we see the blueprint of modern education, and in her silence, we feel the weight of forgotten greatness. As Europe entered the age of exploration, another kind of visionary emerged, the mapmakers and navigators who redrew the world. But for every Columbus or Magellan, there were countless unnamed sailors, indigenous guides, and astronomers who made their journeys possible. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators had mastered the art of wayfinding, using stars, waves, and wind patterns long before Europeans ventured beyond their shores. They crossed vast oceans without compasses, guided by memory and intuition passed down through generations. When European explorers discovered the Pacific Islands, they claimed novelty over what had been known for centuries. The Polynesian navigators' knowledge was dismissed as folklore, their precision ignored. Yet today, science recognizes their methods as among the most sophisticated navigational systems ever devised. Proof that genius is not bound by geography or skin color, but by imagination. In the shadow of the Industrial Revolution, another wave of forgotten visionaries began to emerge. The inventors who laid the foundations for modern technology but were robbed of recognition. Among them was Thomas L. Jennings, an African-American tailor who in 1821 became one of the first black inventors to receive a U.S. patent. He created a method for dry cleaning clothes, a simple yet revolutionary idea that transformed the textile industry. But Jennings's name never entered school books. His race and the prejudice of his time erased his contributions from public memory. For every Jennings, there were hundreds more, enslaved inventors whose creations were stolen by their masters and patented under different names. Their brilliance was shackled, their ownership denied, yet their work propelled industries forward. The machines that powered America's progress were often built on the ingenuity of people it refused to call free. Another unsung mind of this era was Mary Anning, a fossil hunter from the English coast. Born poor and uneducated, she uncovered the first complete ichthyosaur skeleton, fundamentally altering the understanding of prehistoric life. Yet, as male scientists presented her findings to the Royal Society, her name was omitted from the records. Mary's discoveries fueled the rise of paleontology, but she lived and died in poverty, unacknowledged by the institutions that benefited from her labor. Her story is one of resilience, a reminder that genius often blooms in the harshest soils, where recognition cannot take root. The cliffs of Lyme Regis still whisper her name to those who listen, a tribute to the woman who rewrote Earth's history with her bare hands.
Across the Atlantic, another visionary was quietly shaping the future of power, Nikola Tesla, a man whose imagination seemed to stretch beyond human comprehension. Though his name is not forgotten today, much of his genius was stolen, mocked, and ignored during his lifetime. He envisioned wireless energy, radio communication, and even global electricity networks, ideas a century ahead of his time. Yet he died alone, impoverished, and dismissed as a mad dreamer. The world remembered Edison, the businessman, but forgot Tesla, the visionary. His tragedy embodies the fate of countless inventors whose intellects outpaced the world's willingness to understand.
Tesla's forgotten years are a testament to how innovation often requires madness, and how society frequently punishes those who dream too boldly. In the same era, women across continents were rewriting the rules of science in secret. Ada Lovelace, the daughter of Lord Byron, foresaw the future of computing when she wrote the first algorithm intended for a machine. Yet for more than a century, her contributions were attributed to Charles Babbage, her male collaborator. Ada envisioned a world where machines could process symbols, create music, and simulate intelligence, a vision that would not materialize until the digital age. She was dismissed as fanciful, her intellect trivialized by her gender. Today, every line of computer code bears her shadow, yet even now, her name is more legend than household memory. Ada's foresight was not a dream, it was prophecy, one ignored by her world, but embraced by ours. The Industrial Revolution also brought forth forgotten engineers who changed the course of transportation and industry. Elijah McCoy, a Black Canadian inventor, developed the automatic lubricator for steam engines, a breakthrough so effective that engineers demanded "the real McCoy," a phrase that still lives in modern speech. Yet few remember the man behind it. Similarly, Margaret Knight, known as the female Edison, invented the paper bag machine, transforming packaging forever. She fought a man who tried to steal her patent, proving her invention in court and defending her genius in a world that doubted a woman's ability to invent. Her name faded in the industrial noise, but every folded paper bag carries her legacy, a silent tribute to perseverance. As factories hummed and smokestacks rose, another kind of visionary began to shape the invisible, those who reimagined the human spirit. In the mid-19th century, Frederick Douglass emerged not only as an abolitionist, but as one of the greatest orators and photographers of his time. His photographs, deliberate and dignified, challenged racist portrayals of Black Americans. Douglass understood the power of the image, using it to reclaim humanity from dehumanization. Yet his artistry as a photographer is rarely discussed, overshadowed by his political activism. Douglass's mastery of visual representation makes him one of history's earliest theorists of media, a forgotten pioneer of how identity could be shaped through art. He understood that visionaries do not always invent machines. Sometimes they invent new ways of being seen.
Beyond the Western world, visionaries of the 19th century were battling not for fame, but for survival. In Japan, before the Meiji Restoration, samurai scholar Sakuma Shozan preached a radical idea: Eastern ethics, Western science. He believed Japan could modernize without losing its soul, that progress and tradition could coexist. For this, he was labeled a traitor and assassinated. Yet his vision became the foundation of modern Japan's philosophy, a nation blending technology with ancient wisdom. His dream lived on in the modernization that followed, though his name faded into the margins of history books. Like so many before him, Sakuma was punished for thinking beyond his time, but his legacy became the invisible thread binding Japan's transformation. In India, during British colonial rule, the visionary mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan emerged from poverty to redefine mathematics. Without formal training, he discovered formulas that baffled even Cambridge professors. His notebooks, filled with thousands of equations, continue to inspire mathematicians today. Yet during his short life, he was often dismissed as an anomaly, a curiosity rather than a genius. Colonial prejudice and poor health robbed the world of his full potential. Ramanujan's story is not just one of intellect, but of faith. He believed his mathematical visions came from the divine. In that union of spirituality and logic lies a truth that transcends borders. Genius does not conform. It transforms. Every century has its forgotten visionaries, some erased by power, others by prejudice, and many by time itself. But as the Industrial Revolution gave way to modernity, one thing became clear. Progress is not a linear journey led by heroes, but a mosaic of invisible hands. The forgotten visionaries are the pulse beneath the great movements of history. They are the weavers of progress, each thread connecting generations, each innovation a whisper from the past carried into the present. The second act of our story closes with the hum of machines, the rhythm of factories, and the quiet heartbeat of unsung minds. They are not names etched on monuments, but the very foundation of everything we now take for granted. The bridges we cross, the lights that illuminate our cities, the medicines that heal us, all are echoes of their invisible genius. The world may not remember their faces, but their legacies live in every act of creation, in every discovery, in every human who dares to dream beyond the limits of what is known. Their stories remind us that greatness does not always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears the calloused hands of a laborer, the ink-stained fingers of a writer, or the trembling courage of a woman holding a paintbrush in defiance of silence. They remind us that history's truest visionaries are not always remembered, but their visions endure, waiting for the moment when the world is finally ready to see.
As the 20th century dawned, the world was poised at the threshold of transformation. Empires trembled, machines roared, and humanity reached for the skies. But as the bright light of modernity illuminated cities and skies, it also cast long shadows. Shadows where countless visionaries continued to labor unseen. They were the thinkers who envisioned the impossible, the dreamers who challenged convention, and the creators whose ideas were stolen, dismissed, or forgotten. Their brilliance shaped the modern world, but their names rarely found a place in its narrative. This is their story, the story of minds that built the century of progress while remaining invisible to the applause of history. In the early 1900s, a quiet revolution was unfolding in the world of physics. While Albert Einstein's name soared across continents, another brilliant mind, Emmy Noether, was transforming mathematics and physics in ways few understood. Her theorem, linking symmetries in nature to conservation laws, became the cornerstone of modern physics, from quantum theory to general relativity. Yet, because she was a woman, she was denied a formal academic position for most of her life. Einstein himself called her the most significant creative mathematical genius since the higher education of women began. But even his praise could not rewrite the world's biases. Emmy died in obscurity, her ideas only fully appreciated decades later. Today, her theorem is a pillar of modern science, but her story remains a whisper, a reminder of how often gender determines memory, not merit. In laboratories across continents, women were rewriting the fabric of science, though the world refused to see them. Lise Meitner, an Austrian physicist, was the first to explain nuclear fission, the process that would change the course of history. Yet, when the Nobel Prize was awarded, it went solely to her male collaborator, Otto Hahn. Meitner's contribution, the intellectual breakthrough that made nuclear energy possible, was erased from the record. She fled Nazi persecution, carrying with her only a suitcase and her brilliance. The atomic age began in her shadow. Though she despised the weaponization of her discovery, her work laid the foundation for both the energy that lights our homes and the bombs that haunt our conscience. Lise Meitner's name should have stood beside Einstein and Curie, but history chose silence over justice. Another forgotten pioneer of the 20th century was Alice Ball, a young African-American chemist who, before her untimely death at 24, developed the first effective treatment for leprosy. Her Ball method transformed a disease once seen as a death sentence into a curable condition. Yet, after her death, a male colleague took credit for her discovery, publishing her results under his own name. For decades, Alice was erased from medical history, her legacy buried beneath the comfortable myths of institutional racism. It took nearly a century for her contribution to be acknowledged. The irony is profound. Her treatment cured others of disfigurement, while history disfigured her name.
The same fate met Dr. Qiansheng Wu, a Chinese-American experimental physicist who helped disprove one of physics' most sacred principles, the conservation of parity. Her work revolutionized the understanding of subatomic behavior, leading to a Nobel Prize that was awarded not to her, but to the men who used her data. Known as the First Lady of Physics, Wu's experiments reshaped quantum theory, yet she remained largely unrecognized outside academic circles. She once said, "There is only one thing worse than coming face to face with failure, and that is not having the courage to try." Her courage changed science forever, even if history refused to pronounce her name loudly enough. As science advanced, so did art and philosophy.
And in their depths, too, lay forgotten visionaries. Consider Hilma af Klint, a Swedish artist who, before Kandinsky or Mondrian, painted the first true abstract works in the early 1900s. Her art was not imitation, but revelation, spiritual, geometric, and decades ahead of its time. She believed the world was not ready for her vision, and instructed that her paintings be hidden for 20 years after her death. When they were finally revealed, they redefined the history of modern art, proving that abstraction had a female pioneer who existed before the movement was born. Hilma painted not for fame, but for the future, and the future, at last, has begun to listen. In the heart of India, as colonial chains still clattered, another kind of visionary emerged. Spiritual reformers and intellectuals who reimagined freedom not as a political event, but as a moral awakening. Rabindranath Tagore, though celebrated, is often remembered only as a poet, yet his vision went far beyond literature. He founded an experimental university at Santiniketan that merged Eastern and Western philosophies, teaching students to see the world as one family. Tagore dreamed of a global humanity beyond nations and religions, a dream that would inspire educators worldwide. Still, while his songs became anthems for independence, his educational vision was dismissed as idealism. Today, as the world struggles with division, Tagore's philosophy feels less like a forgotten dream and more like a map we never followed. In the Caribbean, another voice sang against the currents of oppression. Claudia Jones, a Trinidad-born journalist and activist who laid the foundation for the Notting Hill Carnival in London. Exiled from the United States during the Red Scare, she fought for racial equality and immigrant dignity. Her writings, fierce and eloquent, gave birth to the British civil rights movement, yet her name was rarely uttered. Claudia envisioned a world where culture could be resistance, where music could heal what politics divided. When she died, her grave was placed beside Karl Marx's, a silent acknowledgement that revolutionaries come in many colors and genders. Her carnival, born of pain, now fills the streets of London each year with joy, rhythm, and freedom. Her legacy dancing where her name was once silenced.
The 20th century's forgotten visionaries were not only scientists and artists, they were revolutionaries of the human spirit. Bayard Rustin, a black gay activist and strategist of the U.S. civil rights movement, orchestrated the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech. Yet Rustin was kept in the background, his sexuality deemed too controversial for public acknowledgement. The dream that changed America bore his blueprint, yet his name was nearly erased from the movement he helped build. Rustin's story reminds us that even revolutions can be selective in their memory, that freedom itself can be haunted by silence. In the world of technology, another kind of invisibility thrived, the invisibility of women whose code and calculations sent men to the stars. Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, African-American mathematicians at NASA, were the hidden computers behind the space race. Their equations guided rockets, shaped trajectories, and made spaceflight possible. But for decades, they were known simply as the girls. They worked under segregation, barred from meetings, yet their minds reached beyond Earth. It took a film, Hidden Figures, to remind the world that behind every astronaut who walked on the moon stood women who calculated their way through prejudice and into eternity. Their genius was not just in numbers, it was in their courage to persist when everything conspired to erase them. And while NASA soared skyward, another forgotten pioneer was changing the world of communication. Hedy Lamarr, a glamorous Hollywood actress, secretly co-invented frequency hopping technology during World War II, a system designed to prevent the interception of radio-controlled torpedoes. Her invention became the foundation for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS. Yet because she was a woman, and an actress at that, no one took her seriously. The patent expired before the world realized its value. Lamarr once said, "The brains of people are more interesting than the looks of people." History remembered her beauty, but not her brilliance.
Today, every smartphone carries a fragment of her genius, even if few know her name. The story of forgotten visionaries is also the story of colonized voices that spoke truth to power. In Kenya, environmentalist Wangari Maathai began planting trees, simple, humble acts that grew into a movement. She founded the Green Belt movement, empowering women to fight deforestation and reclaim their land. Though she faced imprisonment, ridicule, and violence, her vision of ecological harmony and human dignity transformed global environmental activism. She became the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet even then, her name remained less known than the men who spoke about saving the planet. Maathai's movement was not about saving trees. It was about saving humanity from forgetting its roots in the earth.
In the corridors of medicine, too, unacknowledged heroes changed the course of history. Henrietta Lacks, a black woman from Virginia, died in 1951, unaware that her cells, taken without consent, would become immortal. Her cell line, known as HeLa, became the foundation for countless medical breakthroughs, vaccines, cancer research, gene mapping. Her contribution transformed medicine, yet her family lived in poverty for decades, unaware that a part of her had become the most studied biological material in the world. Henrietta's story is one of violation and legacy, a haunting symbol of how marginalized bodies have often paid the price for humanity's progress. Even as the world celebrated modernity, indigenous wisdom continued to be dismissed, though it often held the keys to sustainability and balance. In the Amazon, the knowledge of shamans and healers guided scientists to countless medicinal plants that became modern drugs. Yet their names, their traditions, their ecosystems were rarely acknowledged. The intellectual theft of indigenous wisdom became the silent shadow of global development. The rainforests, once libraries of living knowledge, are now vanishing faster than we can record their stories. The forgotten visionaries of these cultures do not leave behind written equations or blueprints. They leave songs, rituals, and a sacred understanding that the earth itself is alive. As the century moved forward, other forms of creativity began to bloom, forms that challenged not only art, but society's very definition of genius. Alan Turing, the father of computer science, broke the Nazi Enigma code and helped end World War II. His algorithms formed the basis of artificial intelligence, yet he was persecuted for his homosexuality and driven to suicide. The nation he helped save destroyed him. Today, every machine that computes, every AI that learns, owes its existence to a man whose life was broken by the same civilization his mind preserved. Turing's story is one of both triumph and tragedy, proof that even in the age of reason, ignorance can still destroy brilliance. In every field, science, art, politics, and spirit, the 20th century overflowed with forgotten visionaries. They were the ones who dreamed of a fairer world while others built empires. They were the thinkers who asked questions too uncomfortable for their time. Their legacies survive not in statues or textbooks, but in the quiet revolutions of thought that ripple through generations. They remind us that progress is not a parade of the famous. It is a river of countless anonymous contributions flowing together to shape the human story. The forgotten are not truly gone. Their ideas live in the codes we type, the medicines we take, the art that moves us, the freedoms we now assume. Their invisibility is our inheritance, and their endurance is our hope. To remember them is to redefine what it means to be great, not by recognition, but by contribution. As the 20th century drew to a close, one could almost hear their collective whisper rising through time. We were here. We dreamed, we created, we loved, and though history forgot our names, it could not erase our impact. The future they imagined is the present we live in, and the future we dream of will someday depend on remembering them.
History, at its deepest core, is not only written by victors but carried forward by the visionaries who dared to imagine beyond conquest. They were not always warriors or kings. Some were poets, dreamers, scientists, and spiritual guides who defied the rigid hierarchies of their time. As empires rose and fell, their influence drifted across continents like whispers in the wind, unnoticed by the world at large, yet immortal in their quiet persistence. In this part of our journey, we step into the corridors of forgotten empires and rediscover the visionaries whose thoughts, art, and ideals transcended the boundaries of their civilizations. The Mughal Empire, known for its splendor and architectural wonders, owed much of its enduring grace to the vision of one man who is often left out of grand historical retellings, Abul Fazl. More than a court historian, he was Emperor Akbar's philosopher, his dream interpreter, and the intellectual engine behind the syncretic faith known as Din-e-Ilahi. While the world remembers Akbar for his tolerance and progressive rule, it was Abul Fazl who conceptualized the idea of harmony between diverse religious communities, seeing the empire as a living organism that thrived on unity through understanding. His vision of governance as an ethical, almost spiritual duty reshaped how the Mughals viewed leadership, not as domination, but as stewardship. Yet, his ideas, radical for their time, made him enemies among orthodox factions, leading to his tragic assassination. Still, centuries later, his writings remain a living testament to the belief that empires could be sustained by wisdom rather than fear. Across the Indian Ocean, in the heart of Africa, another visionary was quietly reshaping his world, Ahmed Baba of Timbuktu. While much of Europe was drowning in superstition during the late medieval era, the scholars of Timbuktu were composing thousands of treatises on philosophy, astronomy, and law. Ahmed Baba, among the brightest of them, stood as a defender of African intellect and dignity during a time of enslavement and invasion. When Morocco's forces plundered Timbuktu, he was captured and taken to Marrakesh. But even in chains, his scholarship did not dim. He lectured Moroccan scholars, debated with theologians, and refused to let the intellectual light of West Africa die. His vision of an Africa defined not by servitude, but by knowledge, was a rebellion against the narratives imposed by outsiders. Today, the rediscovery of the Timbuktu manuscripts is not merely a historical event, it is a resurrection of Ahmed Baba's dream, that wisdom belongs to no single race or nation, but to all humanity. Further north, in the shadow of the Ottoman Empire, a woman named Mirama Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, defied the silence expected of women in royal courts. She was a princess, yes, but also a patron, a strategist, and a silent force of diplomacy who used architecture as her language. Her mosque complexes, designed by the legendary Mimar Sinan, were not only places of worship, they were messages of equality inscribed in stone. Mirama used her influence to support trade routes, charitable foundations, and intellectual gatherings that strengthened the Ottoman Empire's social fabric. She represents an entire generation of women whose brilliance was masked by the curtains of history. Rulers, builders, and thinkers whose fingerprints still linger in the marble of ancient cities.
In Renaissance Italy, amid the dazzling names of Leonardo and Michelangelo, one figure's light has been unjustly dimmed: Sofonisba Anguissola. She was a painter of remarkable sensitivity who broke through gender barriers to become the first female artist to achieve international recognition. Mentored by Michelangelo himself, she brought emotion, psychology, and subtle realism into portraiture at a time when women were denied access to formal artistic training. Her self-portraits whispered rebellion through grace. Her subjects gazed back at viewers with a quiet intelligence that defied objectification. Even when serving at the Spanish court, Sofonisba retained her independence, teaching male artists and influencing generations that followed. Her work, long attributed to men, is finally being reclaimed, a triumph of art over patriarchy and of truth over erasure. But vision is not confined to art or governance alone. In the New World, the Inca philosopher and chronicler Felipe Guamán Palma de Ayala penned a monumental manuscript addressed to the King of Spain, a 1,000-page illustrated chronicle detailing the injustices suffered by his people. His work, El primer Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, was both a plea and a prophecy.
Through words and images, he envisioned a future where the colonized and the conquerors could coexist in moral harmony. Though his letter never reached the king, its rediscovery centuries later transformed our understanding of indigenous resistance. Guaman Poma was not a rebel with weapons, but with ideas. He sought reform through reason, exposing the corruption of colonial officials while offering a vision of governance grounded in empathy and mutual respect. The whisper of vision also reached the Far East, where in 17th century Japan, Ihara Saikaku captured the moral transformation of an age through his stories. A master of wit and empathy, he wrote about merchants, lovers, and the poor, those whom history's grand chronicles ignored. In doing so, he redefined literature itself, giving voice to the voiceless and crafting a mirror for society's conscience. His works, such as The Life of an Amorous Man, blended humor and heartbreak to reveal the contradictions of a rapidly changing world. Saikaku's realism, radical for his time, helped lay the groundwork for the Japanese novel as we know it. Moving west again, in Europe's Age of Enlightenment, one name stands quietly in the background of giants like Voltaire and Rousseau: Olympe de Gouges. A playwright and activist, she dared to pen the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen in 1791, at a time when even the revolution denied women equality. Her words, "Woman is born free and remains equal to man in rights," echo through history as a challenge that is still not fully answered. De Gouges envisioned a France that extended liberty and justice to all, but her courage cost her life at the guillotine. Her death marked not the end of her influence, but the beginning of a feminist consciousness that would eventually reshape the world.
Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, the Haitian visionary Toussaint Louverture was translating the philosophies of freedom into the language of revolution. Once enslaved, he led his people in the first successful revolt that overthrew colonial rule and abolished slavery. But Toussaint's true genius was not only his military brilliance, it was his vision of a society where liberty did not descend into vengeance. He negotiated with European powers, drafted constitutions, and dreamt of a black republic that could coexist with its former oppressors on equal footing. Though betrayed and imprisoned by Napoleon's forces, Toussaint's ideals lived on, shaping Haiti's independence and igniting liberation movements across the Americas. In Persia, another voice of enlightenment rose amid the mists of tradition. Tahiri Qurat al-Ain, a poet and theologian who became one of the earliest advocates for women's rights in the Islamic world. She defied social norms by unveiling herself in public during a religious gathering, declaring, "You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women." Her words, echoing through the streets of 19th century Iran, carried the spark of modernity into an era of dogma. Tahiri's execution did not silence her, it immortalized her as a martyr for the cause of equality. Each of these figures, spread across continents and centuries, embodied a distinct kind of visionary courage. Some wielded brushes, others words, and some governed empires, but all shared a faith in the unseen potential of humankind. They were architects of the possible, working in silence while history roared around them. Their legacies were often buried, distorted, or stolen, yet they persisted in fragments. Paintings rediscovered, letters unearthed, monuments restored, and ideas reborn. If there is a common thread binding them, it is this. They believed that vision is not merely foresight, but moral clarity, the ability to see what should be, even when blinded by what is. The forgotten visionaries of history teach us that greatness is not the privilege of power, but the consequence of purpose. Whether through rebellion or reform, art or philosophy, they transformed suffering into strength and obscurity into eternity. And as the world continues to turn, their whispers still move through us, reminding us that progress is never born from conformity, but from the courage to imagine differently. These are the souls who refuse to fade, who, even when silenced by empire, time, or tyranny, left behind something more enduring than monuments, an idea, glowing quietly in the dark, waiting to be remembered.
The final act of history's forgotten visionaries does not unfold in the ruins of ancient cities or within the dust-laden pages of lost manuscripts. It lives here, in the pulse of the modern world. The visions they once whispered have become the foundations of revolutions, the melodies of art, and the silent architecture of progress. Their forgotten legacies, though once buried beneath centuries of neglect, are re-emerging with renewed brilliance. Part 5 of our journey is not only a tribute, but a resurrection, a testament to how ideas outlive empires and how truth, once born, refuses to die. In the early dawn of the modern age, as the world shifted from monarchies to nations, a humble reformer in Bengal named Raja Ram Mohan Roy became a bridge between the past and the future. He envisioned an India where reason, science, and spirituality could coexist, fighting against social evils like Saudi and advocating for women's education and freedom of expression. Roy's vision ignited the Indian Renaissance. He believed that civilization's strength lay not in conquest, but in conscience. His efforts inspired generations of thinkers, from Vivekananda to Gandhi, who would later turn his vision into a global movement for moral awakening. Though dismissed in his time as too Western by some and too radical by others, his dream of a world guided by intellect and empathy continues to shape the spirit of progress across continents. Far from India, across the Atlantic, another forgotten mind was quietly revolutionizing the concept of freedom. Sojourner Truth, an African-American woman born into slavery who became one of the most powerful orators of the 19th century. Her speeches transcended the politics of abolition. They pierced through the moral heart of humanity. In her most famous address, Ain't I a Woman?, she shattered centuries of prejudice, uniting race and gender in one call for equality. Her voice, raw and divine, echoed the pain of the oppressed and the possibility of redemption. She was not merely an activist, she was a prophet of justice. Though she could not read or write, her words carried the weight of divine truth, reminding the world that vision does not require education, it requires conviction. As the Industrial Revolution reshaped Europe's cities into machines of smoke and ambition, another visionary saw danger where others saw progress. John Ruskin, the English art critic and philosopher, spoke against the soulless mechanization of human life. He envisioned a society where art, nature, and morality existed in harmony. His essays inspired not only artists like William Morris, but also social reformers who laid the groundwork for environmentalism and ethical design. Ruskin saw beauty as a spiritual force, a mirror of divine order, and his call for craftsmanship and compassion stood as a moral rebellion against industrial greed. The world, though slow to listen, eventually began to realize that progress without purpose leads only to ruin. A truth Ruskin had already seen in the trembling hands of the factory worker and the polluted air of modernity.
In the vast deserts of Arabia, Ibn Khaldun's shadow still lingers, though centuries had passed since his pen crafted the Muqaddimah, his vision of history as a living science, governed by social, economic, and psychological forces, was so advanced that it would take the modern world 500 years to comprehend it. He foresaw the rise and fall of civilizations as natural cycles, born from unity and destroyed by corruption. Today, his theories inform sociology, economics, and political philosophy. But few remember the man who first dared to treat history as more than chronicles of kings. Ibn Khaldun's genius was not only his intellect, it was his courage to see humanity as a pattern, not an accident. Meanwhile, in the storm of the 20th century, a woman from Poland named Marie Sklodowska-Curie redefined science itself. Her discovery of radium and polonium, her fearless exploration of radioactivity, and her unwavering dedication to truth made her one of the most luminous figures in modern history. But behind the fame of her 2 Nobel Prizes lies a legacy often forgotten: her belief in the moral duty of knowledge. Curie used her discoveries not to seek wealth, but to heal. During World War I, she personally developed mobile X-ray units to save wounded soldiers. She envisioned a science not of power, but of compassion, a torch of knowledge meant to illuminate, not dominate. Her quiet strength, her humility in the face of discovery, and her devotion to humanity made her not just a scientist, but a visionary of light in an age of war and darkness. In the heart of Latin America, another forgotten visionary, Gabriela Mistral, the Chilean poet and educator, wove her dreams into verses of compassion and motherhood. The first Latin American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, she transformed pain into poetry and sorrow into strength. Her words spoke of children, justice, and the quiet dignity of love. But her true legacy lay in education. She saw teaching as an act of salvation, a sacred duty to nurture the human spirit. Mistral's life was one of loneliness and loss, yet her vision transcended despair. She believed that even in a world shattered by cruelty, one could rebuild it through tenderness. Her poetry remains a map to that gentler world, a world still waiting to be born. Beyond art and science, the spirit of forgotten visionaries continues to manifest in those who dared to fight the very concept of oblivion. Consider Nikola Tesla, the man who dreamed of illuminating the entire planet with free, wireless energy. The world remembers Edison for his business, but it was Tesla's imagination that electrified modern civilization. His mind, a storm of lightning and logic, foresaw technologies far ahead of his time: wireless communication, renewable energy, even artificial intelligence. Yet he died alone, impoverished, dismissed as mad by those who could not comprehend his genius. But time, ever the patient judge, restored his place among the immortals. Today, his name powers not only machines, but the collective imagination of humanity. Tesla's tragedy was not failure. It was being born before the world was ready for him.
As the 20th century progressed into chaos and war, another voice rose from the ashes of Hiroshima: Kenzaburo Oe, a Japanese novelist who transformed trauma into moral reflection. His works confronted the brutality of modern warfare, the guilt of survival, and the desperate need for compassion in a fractured world. His writing, deeply personal yet profoundly universal, became a moral compass for post-war Japan. Oe's vision was not one of perfection, but of responsibility. The belief that humanity's redemption lies not in its victories, but in its willingness to remember. And so, memory becomes the true stage of this story. The forgotten visionaries of history do not live in statues or ceremonies, they live in remembrance. Their ideas, once exiled by ignorance or erased by time, now find resurrection through rediscovery. As archaeologists unearth lost texts, as digital archives revive ancient manuscripts, as historians re-examine the past with new empathy, we are reassembling the mosaic of human brilliance. The story of civilization is incomplete without them. Their legacies reach us not as relics, but as responsibilities. They remind us that progress is fragile, that truth must be guarded by conscience, and that genius often hides in humility. We live in an age where technology can spread a lie faster than wisdom. And yet, within this chaos, their spirits return to guide us. The voices of Curie, Abul Fazl, Olympe de Gouges, Sojourner Truth, Ibn Khaldun, and thousands of unnamed dreamers whisper to us still. Do not let vision die in silence. We must learn to see as they saw, to look beyond the present into the possible. The visionary does not predict the future, they create it, through acts of courage that ripple through generations. Every discovery, every reform, every poem and protest is an echo of their light refracted through time. The forgotten are not truly forgotten when their dreams continue to build the world. And so, as we stand in the modern age, an age of limitless information but scarce wisdom, we are faced with a choice. We can let history remain a monument to power,
or we can restore it as a living garden of human genius. To unmask the forgotten visionaries is to rediscover ourselves, to remember that progress was not made by the loudest voices, but by those who spoke softly and truthfully. The final legacy of these visionaries is not merely what they achieved, but what they awakened. The understanding that humanity's greatest strength is its imagination. Empires may crumble, languages may vanish, and names may fade. But the spark that drove these souls to dream, to challenge, to create, to believe can never be extinguished. The future belongs not to those who dominate it, but to those who dare to envision it. And as long as there are minds brave enough to question and hearts strong enough to care, the forgotten will never truly be gone. They are the eternal architects of the possible, the silent guardians of tomorrow. Their voices rise once more, not from the graves of time, but from within us. For every idea born in love, every act inspired by justice, every truth spoken against silence is a resurrection of their light. The story of history's forgotten visionaries is in truth the story of humanity's eternal return to itself.
Join the exploration. Knowledge isn't just learned, it's felt. If today's story inspired you to see the world differently, then join the exploration. Subscribe today, and let's continue uncovering the mysteries that shape our world.